Now I'd like to formally introduce our Q&A panel for tonight. We have Victoria Edmondson, Head of Customer Experience at Netball Australia, Jill Taylor, National Coaching Development Manager at Athletics Australia, Cassandra Hadson, General Manager of Regional Sport Victoria, and Shelley White, Senior Project Officer of Physical Activity at VicHealth. Remember to put your questions in the Q&A section. We'll get to as many as possible. We also have Erica working away at some of them in the background. So Victoria and Shelley, if I could start with you, what are some of the activities that you've seen that can be delivered for people who can't come into the clubs at the moment? And then the second part to that question, I suppose, is how do we keep those people engaged?
Sure, Grant. I'll go first if you like, Victoria. I guess one of the things we really, again, just want to reiterate is that it's a really difficult time for clubs and associations right now, metro and regional, and trying to adapt to exactly that question you've asked. We know clubs offer that social connection better than many things that you can do right now, both in virtual and in physical if you're on location. So at this time, that social environment is really important. So I guess there's two areas. We heard that through the video. It is in that physical activity component and also in the social interactions, and that doesn't have to be around being active. So physical activity in that area, I would say asking the participants is really important to find out what they can do. Is it something you want to do weekly online that you could do as something, or you could also rotate how you actually deliver that. So it could be someone from a team or a club that doesn't normally run something, puts up an activity that they want to share in a group. So you might do that in an online environment. In the social aspects, I know things that have been really effective, particularly Zoom in trivia, and I know we're on Zoom calls all the time, but there's things like step challenge you might do. So teams might get together and have a couple of days of like a weekend where they actually have points and then they collate that, and it's quite fun, and that engages people's confidence again in the club. Another piece might be a bingo game, which is again looking at that social interaction and trying to actually give out different activities that are a bit quirky for teams or club participants to do, and then bring that together. And again, that just keeps people really engaged and connected at the club.
Yeah, so I think to echo what Shelley has just said, one of the key underlying aspects of why people get involved with community sport is that sense of connection. So it's really important to maintain that in the best way that you can. There are heaps of ideas from a social perspective, but if we maybe tackle this, there's definitely some participants who were maybe super excited about starting their sporting journey or being part of their sporting journey for their first time that haven't had that experience yet this year. I'm sure many of you know people like that. So thinking about ways, I suppose, you can at best mimic the experience that they would have had had they been able to physically join you. That could be things like offering to run induction sessions or training sessions, whether they're elements you deliver yourself through digital means, activities you email out, or simply pointing them to other resources, as well as always bringing them back together to have that connection into the club, so that in the future, when we are able to get back on the court or whatever form we play in, people are familiar with the other people in their community, and they've not missed out on that fundamental connection and reason why. What I really think was super important through the webinar that we've just experienced is that understanding different people are different, and that's a critical point. So some of the things we've kind of explored at netball are around that lots of people we're asking lots of people to run things and do things at home. So what are their time pressures that they're experiencing? So the point Shelley made about actually ask your participants, engage in a conversation. What do they want to experience? How do they want to experience this? And I think they'll be really, really receptive to a collaborative approach to a very uncertain time.
Yes, absolutely. Jill and Cassandra, what are your suggestions for easing people back into sport and avoiding injury, especially for those people that have been away from their sport for a while?
Grant, I think one of the really important things is that we acknowledge for people that having a break, that this principle of reversibility, that if you don't use it, you lose it. So that it is completely normal that when they come back, they possibly won't have lost fitness, strength, flexibility, and that's completely acceptable and to be expected, and that we will manage their entry back into sport. We'll ease them back in. They can't just pick up where they left off. And I think it's really important that they understand that is completely normal, and that their club and their coaches will work with them to bring them back, because it's a vulnerable time. If they come back and attempt to pick up from where they left off, they're going to be really vulnerable to being injured, and we want to avoid that. We want to make sure that we ease them back in thoughtfully and carefully, and taking into account their physical capacity when they rejoin.
Yeah, and I think just picking up on what Jill mentioned, I think it's really important to have that conversation and start having that conversation now with your members to find out what level of fitness they're at and what activity they've been doing throughout this period. We know that lots of people are making use of, walks and cycles within those physical distancing measures. Others may not have been as physically active. So it's a matter of having that conversation so that you can structure activities that are appropriate to individuals' fitness levels, and you're able to build on that as well. I note that someone in the chat also asked about what associations could do. And I think here it's really important to think about injury prevention in terms of warm-up and cool-down and all the other things that go along with that. So I think, at an association or a league level, there are things that you can do, such as structuring games, not back-to-back, so you've got space for teams to warm up appropriately, and just thinking about ways that you can help with that injury prevention as well.
I'll open this next question up to anyone. How do we make training activities more engaging, especially in this era of social distancing? We've had participants come to us already since they have gone back to sport, when they were allowed to go back to sport, and mentioned that the social distancing can make training boring. So how do you think we can combat that?
I think one of the good things, it does give an opportunities for us to kind of rethink about that training aspect, taking into consideration the fear of judgment that people might be feeling coming back, and that lack of confidence. So it may have a real opportunity to take away that technical a little bit and make it more fun. So maybe it's not as skill-based in the first starting sessions, maybe, and that could help. Things like also helping to social distance might be around using cones to keep things a bit more distanced, as well as looking at competition drills based on time base, changing up, not match play or these types of things, obviously, that we can't do at that time when we first start going. So it's just thinking a bit differently how we use our equipment.
I think the other element to explore there is, and we talked about it in the webinar, around this personalized approach. So there are any ways you can adapt training so you actually provide more of a one-on-one or a one-to-small group approach to what people individually want to learn or improve. How do you design a program around that ultimately makes your end user feel far more important, I suppose, in your eyes, and supported on a one-on-one basis? Recognize that could be additional load, but ultimately additional reward for customers.
Jill or Cass, did you have anything more for that? We do have another question in the Q&A, but just before we get to that.
Yeah, just in terms of making activities more engaging, because I completely understand the idea of being innovative week on week is actually really exhausting, given all the additional pressures that we're facing at the moment. And one of the things that I would absolutely recommend to particularly the regional clubs out there is to get in contact with your regional sports assembly, because they're a wealth of knowledge, and they can, they're in contact with lots of other clubs, and so often you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are so many resources out there from your state sporting associations, but also absolutely get in contact with the regional sports assemblies, because they'll be able to help you workshop some ideas as well.
Question from Shankar from Sport Northeast. Given the current circumstances in regards to the less active groups in our community, such as older adults who are less motivated, what are your suggestions for getting them motivated and getting them involved in sport and active recreation, potentially for those who haven't been involved in sport for a while?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? And I think one of the things we talk about all the time is about understanding people's motivations and speaking with them and asking them what what would their motivation to be involved look like, and how would they like us to engage. And I think it's really important that we understand that different people have different motivations and different programs that we need to tailor to meet their motivational factors. So I think it's a great question, and I think it's about speaking with those people and then making sure that we listen carefully and modify our practices to be something that is fulfilling for them. So a really welcoming, open environment that reflects what they're looking for in their sport experience.
Anyone else before I throw to the next question? I think we're all good there. Well, I think especially following the announcements from yesterday, something that maybe we can just go around the grounds with our panelists and think a final thought for how we are, where we're situated at the moment, and what we're heading towards for maybe the next 6 weeks, or hopefully beyond that, getting back to sport in terms of doing sport differently and different ways to think about it. Maybe I can just give our panelists another couple of seconds to think about a final thought as we wrap up this webinar. If anyone wants to go first, feel free.
I'll jump in there. I think, the next 6 weeks is, it's going to obviously be a really testing time for lots of Victorians and Melburnians in particular. We're currently, as you mentioned earlier, not sure what the state of play is for regional Victoria, and we should have some clarity around that tomorrow, I believe. But I think in this time it's really important, if you can't engage in physical activity in a group setting, to keep in contact with your members. I can't stress that enough. And there are so many different ways that you can do that. I know that there are some clubs out there that are hosting online challenges. So Vicsport, for example, have run a Strava activity where people are clocking up the Ks that they're doing on their bikes. As Shelley mentioned before, other clubs are doing trivia nights. It's so important to stay connected, because we know that people engage in physical activity for a range of reasons, but in the club setting, the social aspect is one of the main motivators. So if you can continue that going, that's really important.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what Cassie says, and I think the other part is, people really do want to belong and feel like they belong, and that's what sport has that power to do. And we all work in it and volunteer in it and participate in it for that reason. So I think just for committees and clubs and even participants, just to ask themselves about what they can give to that club. Might be small, and just, anything's up on the table, because we've never been here before. So really think about what authentically you could do to make the environment better at your club for your people.
To build on those, the 4 key things I'd recommend people think about are: how do you maintain that community connection? We know that's a really important angle. How do you support your participants during this time? That can be from both a physical and emotional, for some people, sense. Use this time as well to understand what you can about how you could change things within your club. So this is a bit of a silver lining, I suppose, to this period. It buys a bit of time to do some extra exploration about what your participants' needs are, and then around that personalization piece, so explore what you actually have capacity and ability to deliver on a one-on-one basis that maintains people's engagement.
And look, absolutely what everyone has said is really important, and I suppose to summarize it, it's to remember that often sport, there's an emphasis on high performance, but the community aspect of sport is so important, and it's physical health and it's mental health. So whatever we can do to stay in touch with people and encourage them, even if it's just to encourage people to go out for a walk and do that we can encourage, that is really important. And we'll get through this, and we'll be at the other end, and that connection will bring people back to your club.